Mannerism is a period that, after really working on everything being balanced and ideal, we start to see experimentation. Artists are playing, I think, with viewer expectations. This is a facade. This isn't actually them. This is a presentation of themselves.
Fine arts illuminate our present and explicate our past. SCAD professors teach brilliant young creators every day. And in this series, we reveal the works that most inspire our experts. This is SCADclass. Today we encounter an artist who helped define the late Renaissance and the infamous court of the Medici family. Joining me is SCAD Professor of Art History, Stephanie Kaplan.
This is Bartolomeo Panciatichi, and it's a portrait by theirs named Bronzino, which is a nickname. Sounds kind of like a modern fish, I know. Florence, at this time, is ruled by the Medici. For a century, it had kind of been going back and forth. They'd had some behind-the-scenes influences. After the siege of Florence, which ends just around 1530, the city doesn't have a constitution. And when that finally gets fixed, there's a figure, Alessandro de' Medici, who's put in charge. People did not like him so much, and things don't go so well. After him comes Cosimo de' Medici, and Cosimo really figures out how to rule the city-state. He not only fixes things in Florence and establishes his court and, brings together some great artists, but he makes Florence an actor on the international stage, which is really the force of his diplomacy and, quite frankly, having a really good team of advisors. Bronzino started working with the Medici early on. He did decorations for Duke Cosimo's wedding, which is a good way to make friends. If you do it right? People, when their wedding goes well, they tend to be pretty happy. Bronzino leaves during the political turmoil in the 1530s, and he goes to another court, and he kind of finds shelter there, but he also gets a really important experience because he's given the opportunity to paint one of the ducal sitters. Florence had been a republic up until the 1530s. None of the artists really had experience as court artists. And so when Bronzino gets this opportunity to engage with a court and to learn how to be an artist at court, when he comes back and a court is established, he's one of the first artists who really becomes a part of it. Bartolomeo Panciatichi is a Frenchman. He was actually born in Lyon in France around 1507, and he lived there for about 30-odd years. And he moved to Florence probably a year or two before this portrait was painted. He came from a line of businessmen and commercial interests, and his father had very much been invested in him taking over, but as children do, he had no interest in doing that. He pursued literary pursuits, and so as soon as he got to Florence, he joined a local small academy, a literary circle, and it was a way for him to establish himself and bring, his street cred, his French street cred. Because one of the things they really liked about him was that he had these connections to French writers. And yet, while he was presenting himself with this French background, he presents himself in the portrait as a Florentine, as if he's lived there all his life.
While he seemed to be presenting himself as Florentine, he also has his French goatee or beard.
Yes, isn't it fantastic? That is one of...
Slightly evil.
And I'm so glad you noticed it. The beard, this forked beard, became really fashionable in Europe by the 1540s, but it started as a French trend. And so as you observed, his clothing is very Florentine, and Florence was a city of cloth makers. But the beard had been established in France, and they probably would have recognized that. And the beard is so important at this time for men because it required attention. It's all about showing off that wealth, that status, that history. The beard is a not so subtle way. It may seem subtle to us, but it wouldn't have been subtle to viewers. In the mid-16th century, they would know that to maintain that shape, he constantly visited a barber and therefore was able to afford those affectations.
I mean, just his sleeves, the details on the sleeves are quite elaborate.
Aren't they incredible? It's all for show. These slashed sleeves, they were worn so that you could see the expensive materials, not just in the outer layer, but underneath as well. And he has some gold thread and some other beautiful colors under there.
I notice he's holding his book, but he's not really showing you his cards, is he? He's kind of keeping that closed. So maybe he has some secrets? Or maybe he's good at keeping secrets.
We can go either way with that. There is a tradition of portraits in the 1530s where everyone has their book open because they want to show you whatever they're an expert in or whatever they do. And this sort of book, this long, narrow, thin, with this sort of mauve leather cover, would have probably been more of a personal book, almost like having his notebook. And so by having it closed, there's this feeling almost that we've interrupted him. He was sort of outside on the balcony, taking in the air, perhaps getting some inspiration, and that we've interrupted his train of thought and he's turned to acknowledge us. But as a sitter, he certainly had some secrets that he may have been hiding.
And he's showing himself to be worldly, and I imagine that's one of his values to the inner circle of Florence, that he did have these connections and history at the French court. But he's also careful to have his hand on the Italian Mastiff.
One of the things I enjoy about this painting is when you first see it, you don't always notice the dog. Down there in the lower right, kind of in the shadows. There's a lot of debate about the dog, but in general, the dogs were, of course, symbols of fidelity. This went back, you know this story well. But there was a second reading with this type of dog, this sort of larger dog. He's not a lap dog. He's not an indoor dog. So he is probably meant to, again, point to his nobility because he could be used for hunting. That was something to have that time, that money, perhaps that land to hunt on was another way of establishing your status. Plus, he got to sit there and pet the nice doggy. I mean, how is that not great for painting your portrait?
That's what I would want, for sure. Tell me about the architecture.
It's a little odd. I always find when students look at this, they have questions about it because this is a period where we expect everything to be in kind of perfect, linear, one-point perspective. We expect it to look like we've opened the window, or here we're standing at the edge of the loggia looking at the city.
Kind of surreal.
Right. And so one thing is there are these very slight changes to the angle from which they're presented. And I think it helps to sort of clue us into the fact that this isn't a real view. There is a Palazzo Panciatichi that existed at this time, but this wasn't a view that you had from it. And so what the artist seems to have done here is to have taken architecture from the last 150 years, and furthest away he starts with the oldest. And so as we move increasingly closer, we come into the modern era. He's placing this sitter, Bartolomeo, in the modern Florentine idiom. This portrait just elides 30 years of absence. He wasn't in the city. The city had gone through some terrible, turbulent and political times, and he stayed away, as did his family, as did many other Florentines. And yet this portrait says kind of he's here and that he's active. By showing him outside, it suggests that he's this active presence, acting upon and within the city.
And he's side-eyeing his family crest. What is that about?
Yeah, so over
he's like
over his
side-eye.
let me just let you know.
Yeah.
Over his left shoulder, there's the family crest, and he places this in this fantastic sort of fictive niche here underneath that arch. Surrounding it, that gray stone is a local Florentine stone. It's called Pietra Serena, and it was used in all of the civic buildings. It was the main stone, and it became a mark of sort of Florentineness. And so he surrounds his coat of arms, again, in this very Florentine material. Bronzino paints at the same time a portrait of his wife.
She's very beautiful.
Isn't she lovely? You can see that side gaze as well, not only directs us to his coat of arms, but also creates a connection with the portrait of his wife, where he has the closed book, she has the opened book.
Yes.
And
A prayer book, right?
Exactly. And so whereas he has one that might be more kind of civic or secular in nature, she balances him with a prayer book. Whereas he has that fantastic bright color on his sleeves, she has it on her dress.
Yes.
And then the sleeves are that darker and deeper color.
Yes.
So they very much are balancing each other.
So this style of portrait would be called Mannerist. And why is that?
It's such a great question. And this is what drew me to the portrait at the beginning. Mannerism is a period, it's not well defined, that takes place around sort of the middle of the 16th century. And it's a period where, after really working on everything being very naturalistic, but that is also balanced and ideal, we start to see what I like to refer to as experimentation. Artists are playing, I think, with viewer expectations. And I think that this portrait works so well with that, in the way that the architecture's a little bit off, in the way that he's a little still and staid and frozen. These are Mannerist tendencies in creating art that encourages conversation. I think that's one of the real achievements of the Mannerist artists like Bronzino. So Mannerism is happening at the same time that the High Renaissance is. Michelangelo is still working. It starts well before Raphael's death. And yet it seems to be artists who want to experiment and want to play with different ways to create engagement and especially reaction. I always try to get my hands in that little, what he does with his left hand, and they don't, my joints don't quite work that way, it turns out. And that's the other part that's Mannerist here, is it's kind of overly elegant. And this became associated with the courts, because at many of the courts, it was very much about how you presented yourself. And so I love Mannerist portraits because, in a way, to me, they seem like they're telling us that this is a facade. There's a wink and a nod that this isn't actually them, this is a presentation of themselves. It becomes overly artificial in ways that draw attention to it and that say, you know, maybe I am a little more multifaceted than this is presenting me. This portrait doesn't always feel special and important. You know, the details are lovely, but it doesn't feel monumental and movement and action and narrative. And yet it marks an important step in the development, because it's taking that language of Florentinity and those references to the city-state, and now using it in perhaps support of the government, which is where the art will continue to go for a while.
For all of you watching, keep the conversation going in the comments, and I'll see you next time.